Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto created a spy network with his shadow clones. WIP and unconscious Iruka forces Naruto to return to the academy for another year. It also marks the beginnings of a prank whose far-reaching consequences will shake Konoha to its foundations. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 5, The Start of a Plan. Iruka was, as an academy teacher, used to rising early. He'd also had many a late-night grading exams and planning them. However, getting up the morning he was supposed to go to Shinobi Archival was the most difficult beginning of a day he'd had in a long while. Probably since he last did the Chunin exam. He'd stayed awake late, thinking, planning and generally getting stressed. Helping Naruto with his prank had seemed the right thing the morning before, but now he was having second thoughts. The scroll Sarutobi had given him was no help in that. In one sense, he was proud that the Hokage trusted him that much, but on the other hand he feared failure so much more because of that. Scenarios kept running into his head, various failures highlighted all through them. He knew it was only his imagination playing with him, but he couldn't help it. However, that did not mean he wasn't present when his bank opened. He was there, trying to remove the cobwebs of sleep from his mind, requesting a meeting with the banker in charge of his funds. He mainly did that for appearance's sake. No one would suspect a ninja going to his own banker to be carrying on official business. Once safely alone with the man in charge of his accounts, only then did he withdraw the note the Sandaime had given him. Unrolling it in front of the man, he waited for him to be done reading. The look on the man in front of the Chunin was priceless, and Iruka wondered if he had made the same face when he'd first seen those words. Once the civilian was finished reading, Iruka had no difficulty asking for the balance of Konoha's accounts in the bank. The Hokage had different accounts in various banks, both as a precaution against thieves, and as making it easier for various ninja to receive money from the various funds that existed. This bank was the one used for the orphans fund, a precaution used by people whose parents had died in service. Iruka had long ago been one of those, and had kept the same bank upon becoming a genin. With how vast the account was, Iruka had not trouble withdrawing 5 million ryu. In his mind, it should be more than enough to buy 2 houses of good quality, with enough spare to live with. He even withdrew a little more just in case, as he didn't want to have to come back for more funds. The only delay was gathering the money, as Iruka needed it in cash. It would be suspicious for a newly arrived family to have access to an account in a bank in Konoha, so cash was the only possibility. He'd even go in advance and brought a storage scroll for such a purpose. After receiving the money and only a few words of warning to the bank employee about keeping silent, the Chunin was now on his way to his second target of the day, the Shinobi Archival. Shinobi Archival was where most official and non-official ninja documents ended up. It was also the dead-end job of many a genin. Iruka had once feared he'd end up working there full-time, before he managed to pass his Chunin exam. He was lucky that year that he'd managed to do a good enough showing to get in the finals, and be promoted afterwards. Else he'd probably be like the genin who welcomed him into the heavily secured building. Despite having been to the archive many a time due to his work at the academy, he'd never managed to be comfortable inside the documentation building. He'd been at school with many of those now working here, and remembered the grand ambitions they had while they were students, ambitions many of his own pupils shared. It always gave him a shiver to think about it. Suddenly, the Chunin teacher realized that if things continued as they were now, and Naruto kept on in the academy, this might be the place where he'd end up. This simple thought of a prankster like the boy working around that much paperwork chilled his bones like never before, and pushed him to make sure that his protege would never end up like this. The letter stamped by the Hokage drew no funny looks here, as such papers were possibly more common than one would expect. The Chunin further twisted the tracks leading to Naruto by asking for all old abandoned ninja properties, then selecting 3 at random. As Iruka left the ninja building, he realized that he felt more alive than he'd long felt. It brought him back to the missions he had before he made Chunin and became a teacher, and the risks he'd taken then. He liked being a teacher, but wondered for the first time if he'd not stopped too early in his career. And as he waited for noon in his office at the academy, he had much time to think about that. He was still thinking when, while waiting on Naruto in Training Ground 23, a little girl came to him. "Mister, you a ninja?" She was very young and cute, at most 6, with tressed red hair and a yellow dress. "Yes. Yes. Is it true ninja don't fear nothing?" "Of course." Not really, actually, but Iruka wasn't going to ruin the dreams of a girl that young. "Then you can help me find my kitty?" "Sure." It wasn't like Naruto could wait a few minutes. It wasn't even 12 yet. "Where is it?" The child smiled shyly. "It's in there." She led him to one of those large pipes the buildings used to evacuate steam. However, that one hadn't seemed used in a while. The grate was rusted and the lock broken. "It chased a mousey and I don't like the dark. Can you go and get him?" "Sure." It was tight for a man of his age, but he could squeeze through easily enough. He hadn't made a dozen meters that he could see the 2 shining eyes of the cat in front of him. "Ah, finally. Come here, kitty." The cat, in answer, meowed and moved away. The teacher launched himself in pursuit, which was made easier by the fact the pipe seemed to be widening. The feline, however, gave as good as it got and kept a few meters apart all the time. It wasn't until Iruka saw light in the tunnel that he realized he'd been had. Taking a deep breath, he called out. "You can come out now, Naruto." "I know it's you." "What gave it away?" Came a voice right behind him. Managing to turn, he realized the little girl had followed him down the pipe. The light. That and the fact that, for however long I crawled, the tunnel never turned. Damn. The girl said. It was bizarre to see the natural inflections Naruto used on a girl that small though. I was sure you wouldn't find out until the latter. He released his own hinge with a seal. Good prank, however. I didn't even notice anything bizarre about the little girl. It wouldn't have worked if you weren't early, however. Where did you get the cat? See for yourself, Naruto said, pointing behind Iruka's back. Turning around once again, the Chunin saw the cat had stopped right below one of the seal lights. Then, with a burst of smoke, another Naruto was standing there instead. Iruka was shocked. The conventional hinge would have difficulty turning anyone into a little girl, because of the difference in mass. A small genin like Naruto might have done it, though he'd need a horrible amount of skill to pull it off, something most genins would never have. The cat, however, simply impossible. Trying to hide how much he'd been had, and how much Naruto's technique was superior to the academy-taught one, he instead asked, "So, which one is the clone?" "Both of us." The Naruto in the light answered. "The real one's downstairs training. I was sent to wait on you 30 minutes ago," the clone still being a little girl added. "When I saw you were already there, I had the idea of trying to get you inside without you noticing." "And how did you come up with that plan? When you didn't notice anything special about the black dog that came to you?" "You were." Iruka wanted to hit his head on something. It was getting more and more difficult to pretend Naruto's hinge was anything like the normal one. "Yup. Then I created the other clone here, and you know the rest." Suddenly, Iruka realized something that made him afraid as he'd never been. "Did the original put you up to this?" "Nope, that was all me." The academy teacher instantly feared for his sanity. He already had problems keeping up with one prankster, and now he could multiply himself. He hadn't realized that the clones themselves could have inspirations and act on them. He feared for Konoha. He really did. Following the council meeting of yesterday, since Naruto and his clones couldn't get in agreement on what to train on first, Naruto had decided to split the number of clones in 7, forming 8 teams with himself alone in the last. The original academy student had agreed that they should work on at least one jutsu of each element, with 2 others being added at the last minute. The fire technique that was finally selected was one called Katon, Akaraka Jigoki. An Uruhara technique made in imitation of the Uchiha's ultimate fire technique. It was surprisingly not banned due to being dangerous to the user's coils. The reason noted on the scroll was that it was a technique too difficult to train in, as failures controlling said jutsu tended to kill the trainee. The fact that the Uchiha had long campaigned to get it banned probably hadn't helped. Suiton, Tapa Nami Kyoha was decided on the water side. An original technique invented by the Nidaime, it was well known for needing to create water out of raw chakra instead of using the one already present. This fact had made every person trying it since the second Hokage fall out of chakra exhaustion after a single use. Futon, Yuzusuna no Ori had the same side effect. As a wind technique originally from Sunagure, it was very powerful, but demanded so much chakra that even most jonin couldn't use it even once. Again, same thing for Doton, Tsukioni no Tsuno. That earth technique was especially exhausting due to the fact that you used chakra to pressurize the rock, shaping it to be diamond hard before making it surge through the ground at your adversary. However, the lightning technique was simply deadly, being of Uruhara make. Raitun Saisho Hoden transformed all your chakra in electrical current, frying you and whatever you were holding. That was going to be definitely a clone-only technique. The two ones added were a technique banned by the Hyugas called Chakra Shield, and one banned by the combined might of both the Uchiha and Hyuga whose name was Raitun, Mabushii Kagayaki. The first was all about creating a solid second skin made of chakra to block attacks, something that was said to interfere with the Hyuga Juken. That one would be especially useful if successful, as most physical attacks on clones would be deadly to them. The second, though, was simply added to the training list out of spite. It generated a blinding flash of light. What made it banned, however, was probably the fact that at close range, it could deal permanent damage to dojutsu users. It also gave much credence to the fact that the Uruharas, who had invented the technique, hated the Uchiha and vice versa. The original's work, however, was all about the Kage Bunshin. Since there was no proof that they'd master the chakra shield in time, or at all, he was testing the physical limits of his clones and trying to increase them. His tests had already proved it possible, as one of the clones made in the forest while training on chakra draining was already more solid than one Naruto had just made right then. However, that was all he had found by now. When Iruka entered the Uruhara basement, flanked by two of his clones, Naruto instantly gave up his fruitless tries at improving the Kage Bunshin, and jumped up to his sensei. He was about to ask for the results of his trips, but one look at his teacher sealed his lips. Iruka was white. Naruto had never seen his teacher with a face so pale, even counting the time he'd pretended to have missed his target at kunai throwing while he'd transformed into a copy of himself with said kunai stuck in the side of the head. With blood flowing down his face, of course. "Sensei, are you okay?" The man gaze focused with inhuman speed on Naruto's face. "You are the original, right?" Yes." In a flash, Iruka was holding the orange boy up, still staring right into Naruto's blue eyes while the student's feet dangled in the air. "Promise me that you and your clones won't do more than a few pranks here and there. I like Konoha, and I want it to still be standing next year." Sensei? Promise me." It was Iruka's eyes that finally broke Naruto's resolve. They were full of fear, and far too similar to some of the looks civilians gave him to be comfortable. He never wanted any one of his precious people to look at him like that. Okay, I promise." The Chunin gave a sigh that was unmistakably relief, and put the academy student back down. "I won't completely stop, however. It's important for my cover." "Cover? Take you or old man Kazuhi for example. What would you or him think if I was in class, calm and happy for a whole week?" Iruka saw the point the boy was making. "I'd think you were planning something. And you'd be suspicious and investigating, right?" "Right. So, I have to prank people, or they'll be looking at me that much more suspiciously, which doesn't help my clones at all." "I understand. But please don't use your clones too much, or leave them to prank. I seriously fear how much damage could do with those. Damage? I don't hurt anybody with my pranks. I'll give you an example. You remember the day you painted to Hokage Monument? Of course. It was, to him, one of his best. Not so much as the planning, but because of the sheer guts and reactions it showed. Now imagine of much more it could have been using your clones. Naruto smiled. With that, he might even have had time to write down the dirty limericks he'd been thinking of on the third's face. Iruka had appeared much too early that day. Now think about that happening to your apartment. That was unfortunately much too easy to visualize. Similar things had already happened, especially near his birthday. He'd once came back from the academy to find Demon Be Gone in large letters written everywhere over his apartment, and his few spare clothes doused in paint. Imagining that multiplied by the number of clones he could generate was just too much to think of. His apartment wouldn't even be standing anymore. He realized right at that time how much damage he could do, and understood his teacher's fears. I see what you mean. He finally admitted. I'll try to make my pranks as not damaging as possible, but remember one thing. What? Any teacher who treats me unfairly is gonna get pranked back. I know why they're doing it now, and I won't stand for it. That's good enough for me. Iruka replied. It was especially good for him, as it just meant he wasn't going to be pranked as much as the ones who really deserve it. Those he didn't think he could save anyway. Silence reigned for a few seconds while Naruto fidgeted. So, Iruka, everything went fine? Realizing what the boy meant, the Chunin nodded and withdrew both the deeds and the storage scroll he'd gotten today, and handed them to Naruto. Yup, everything went according to plan. He pointed down to the 3 deeds. These are the deeds to this place and 2 other places I chose. Why 3? He didn't mind, but he wasn't greedy. It wasn't like he needed more than this place anyway. 2 reasons, 1 in case you need to abandon this place for any reason, and 2 to cover my tracks. What do you mean, cover your tracks? It's not the first time I used such a deed. 2 years ago, I withdrew 2 for use by the academy. One house was demolished and became Training Ground 55, but the other is still standing, and is used sometimes as stealth training course. By withdrawing more than 1, I make the impression that I'll be using one of them for something, and keep the rest for later, so nobody is surprised when I don't use a specific one. That means you'll need one of them, right? I'll probably use one of the places you're not using in a training mission sometime next year, just to keep up appearances. You can keep the deeds though. We only remove them to ensure nobody'll use them in the meantime. What about this thing? The academy student held up the scroll. That's a storage scroll, Naruto. I just sealed the money I received inside. How does it work? Surely you remember. Iruka started, then stopped. He knew Naruto had missed the last lesson he did on storage scrolls, as that was the day he'd been painting over a few faces, but couldn't remember if he'd been there for the lecture the year before. What do you know about storage scrolls? Not much, actually, the boy answered, scratching the back of his head. I keep managing to miss that one. Okay. The Chunin replied, mentally preparing himself for his usual academy lecture. Storage scrolls are scrolls with some form of a storage seal on it. To demonstrate, Iruka took back the scroll from his student's hands, and unrolled it on the ground to show the seal written inside. It's a tool commonly used by ninja either to carry large amounts of material, or to hide the contents of what they are carrying from normal view. This scroll actually contains a briefcase, in which the bank deposited the money I withdrew. I mainly sealed that briefcase to hide the fact that I was leaving with a large amount of money. The Chunin put both his hands on the outside contour of the seal. To use a storage seal, one only needs to release a small amount of chakra on the outside line of the seal, like this. Releasing said energy, the briefcase his bank had given him popped back into existence. He removed it. The same thing allows one to put an item in the seal. To demonstrate, the teacher withdrew one of his shuriken and placed it flat on the middle of the seal, then pushed chakra as he had just done. The shuriken vanished in a puff of smoke. There are certain things, however, that must never be inserted in a storage scroll. Anything that would be affected by a direct application of chakra is a bad idea. Especially bad are trying to seal in explosive tags, which explode upon coming out, and storing a storage scroll in another is well known to destroy both scrolls in a dangerous emission of chakra. By molding your chakra correctly and with good focus, one may even further control what goes in or out to summon or seal only certain items. Iruka realized right then that not only Naruto had paid attention to the whole lecture, something he rarely did, some of the clones that had been training around him had actually stopped and listened as well. Any questions? One actually. The original said, "What happens when you don't know what's inside a scroll? You can still release its content, though everything will come at once. Why? Follow me." Iruka followed, as did about 24 clones. Naruto led him back into the Urohara mansion proper, and stopped after entering a room that was very obviously an armory. The Chunin noticed a few of the weapons that had hung on the wall of his student's apartment. The boy, however, led him to a corner where scrolls were stacked into surprisingly neat piles. Some were huge, even larger than the forbidden scroll had been, though most were the usual size for carrying inside a ninja vest. "Sensei, can you identify one scroll from another?" "Most of them probably." "Why?" Naruto handed him a specific scroll. A clone opened this one, and got burst by some sort of trap inside. Iruka recognized the scroll instantly. He'd even had to hunt for one of those more than once, before he made Chunin. "Where did you find this one?" "I think hidden in a training ground." "Why?" "Naruto, this is a heaven scroll. They're, with their earth counterparts, mainly used during some of the Chunin exams, and are supposed to be opened only in specific locations. It's actually surprising you found one, as getting those back is necessary after each exam. It's not of much use outside of the exams, however." "Okay. Now let's look at what you have in there," the Chunin said, taking a first scroll. "Now this." A good 2 hours later, Iruka had finished sorting through the 100 or so scrolls along with Naruto and his clones. He'd sorted them into 5 different piles of very different sizes. "So, Sensei, what's the verdict?" the original asked. Pointing at the largest pile, the Chunin answered. "These, as you've probably noticed, are various storage scrolls. Unsealing their contents should be pretty easy, although you should use clones for that. Some people are good enough to have traps included, but most you'll probably be able to reuse later. The large pile next to them are the useless ones. This pile was nearly as high as the first, and both the Heaven Scroll Naruto had shown him originally and the 2 Earth ones he'd found were included. They're either old mission scrolls, encrypted messages, or other stuff that hasn't any useful purpose. Burning them is probably the only use you'll get out of them." Going to the 3rd largest pile, Iruka continued. "These are blank scrolls. Ninjas competent in seals or teen leaders usually carry some, so those aren't unexpected. You probably will have enough now for the following academy year." Iruka looked sharply at Naruto. "I will be expecting good homework from you and from your clones also, understood?" Naruto gulped and nodded. He just realized that his prank meant 3 times as much homework. "What about the rest?" Naruto added. There were only 8 scrolls combined in those 2 piles, so Naruto automatically wondered what they might be. "Those 5 are scrolls I have no knowledge about. They contain seals, that's for sure, though the specific kind evades me. I wouldn't do anything else than storing them in a corner for now, however. The 3 scrolls to the left are one-use summoning scrolls, though I can't identify of which animal. The 2 white ones are identical, so I expect they summon the same thing. The red one is completely different, so no clue about that one." Intrigued, a clone asked, "What are summoning scrolls, Sensei?" I don't remember hearing about them at all at school. That's not surprising, because it's usually the Genin's Jonin senseis who teach such material. Summoning scrolls are simply scrolls with a summoning jutsu inscribed on it. A summoning technique is a skill where a ninja calls upon a creature to help in a task, be it fighting, hunting, or even passing messages. Summoning techniques require a contract with the creatures being summoned. A person with such a contract can make scrolls like the ones you have, which anybody can use. And how are they used? One simply writes a line in blood along the length of the scroll. Obviously, that means your clones won't be able to summon anything with them. And this contract thing, how does it work? Actually, I've heard it's different for every creature, but haven't any example to offer. The Sandaime has such a contract, so asking him might be a better idea. There are unfortunately only 2 or 3 more leaf ninjas with such contracts, so finding someone else will be very difficult. An idea popped in Naruto's head. And those summoned creatures, can they talk? Probably depends on the summon. I've heard Sandaime-sama's summon can, so at least some have the ability. Oh, one last thing, be careful about using them. Since summons have personalities, they might not like being summoned by you, and fight back. Be careful about using them. Any questions? The academy student shook his head along with his clones. Okay, the Chunin smiled, content that he'd been able to have Naruto listen to the whole explication. The boy had visibly no problem listening when the subject interested him. The classroom environment probably didn't help his studies. Now, Iruka continued. Money. He brought the briefcase he dragged along forward and opened it. Now Naruto had frequently been poor during his short life. The weekly allowance the Hokage had ensured he received was, he supposed, enough for a boy like him, but the inflated prices he now realized he'd been paying all his life had sometimes brought his budget into deficit. It was only the lucky find of a corner store on the opposite side of the city, one that sold ramen at a cheap price, that he'd actually managed to get by. His recent funds were now very short, as more clones meant more ramen consumed. But when Iruka opened that briefcase, he thought that he'd never find himself poor ever in his life. He could only see the top bill of the bundles, but a single one of those bills meant ramen for a week, at the very least. That's all for me? He was actually shaking. Yes. That should actually be enough for 2 houses, with some to spare. Now I want you to be careful with that money, as I expect it is enough until you've made genin. I don't want to have to go get any more, understood? Naruto nodded fervently. You swear you won't use this for pranks outside your multiple clones? Only for houses, food and equipment? I swear. I swear. Okay then. Iruka closed the briefcase and handed it solemnly to Naruto. I'm trusting you with this. His student slowly drew the briefcase to himself, his eyes full of tears. Iruka suddenly realized this was the most trust anyone had ever showed him. He mussed the boy's hair. Don't worry, you'll do fine. Now I'm sure you have plenty to do, and I'm late myself on my academy preparations, so I'll leave you to your planning. Need help getting back? Naruto asked. No, Actually, he wasn't sure he'd be able to get back on his own. He remembered the path he took, but there had been some turns in the dark. Yes, that would be very helpful. Okay, the boy replied, switching into boss mode instantly. You, he said, pointing the closest clone to Iruka. You know the path? Sure. Then you take care of it. Pass the message of a council meeting while you're downstairs, okay? Will do. The rest of you, unless you're a council member, get busy unsealing the scrolls from the storage pile. Yash. As Iruka left the room, following the specified clone, Iruka smiled. The whole prank was also good leadership training, and it did the Chunin good to see how Naruto might be once he's made Hokage. With this many people behind him, it was only a matter of time. After a short council meeting where they'd separated the money into thirds and gave 2 of those to the respective clones, 1 to the family, one to the female ninja and her father. The council had separated back into the various groups they'd used for training. The original, however, had another plan than going back to the Kage Bunshin. He had the idea while listening to Iruka's explanations on summoning. Instead of going to someone who probably wasn't going to answer, or answer cryptically, like the old man, he'd simply ask the summon itself. If they could talk, they'd be able to answer, and with a contract, he'd be that much closer to be Hokage, since the current one had one. He knew that Iruka had told him to be careful, but he was in his underground base, surrounded by hundreds of his clones. He didn't think there was any danger. After a detour to gather said scrolls, Naruto was back to the same spot he'd been training when Iruka arrived. There the clones had given him a wide berth, so anything summoned wouldn't squash any of his Bunshin. Looking at the scrolls, he realized he had two choices. Supposing that the two white scrolls were the same, he could either use a white one or the red one. Thinking for a few seconds and finding no reason to favor any one, he dug into his Gamachan wallet and flipped the first coin he found. Red it was. Unfurling the scroll and slicing open his thumb on a kunai, he drew in one straight move a line down the length of the scroll. Instantly the scroll burned down, and an explosion of smoke similar but dozens of times bigger than the one from his clones covered the area in front of him. It diffused quickly, showing what the scroll had been about. A crab. And not any crab. A gray-black crab twice as high as Naruto, and at least 5 times larger. Cool, he thought. Now that's. And then in a single burst of speed, said cool crab dashed right in front of Naruto and, with a baseball-worthy swing, batted the original a good 200 meters afield. Luckily for Naruto his clones had been paying attention, and a quatuor of those managed to stop him before he impacted on the wall. 3 of those burst from the effort though. The rest charged the summon in waves, but had very little effect. The crab's armored exterior deflected shuriken and kunai with no damage, and physical attacks meant getting in range of those pincers. It was fast also, and could turn quickly. Still wheezing from the blow, the original jumped on top of a rocky outcropping to judge how the battle was going. The clones had cleared a good radius around the creature, though its speed meant it was still able to get some by charging. Brushing away the various memories from dying clones, he focused on trying to figure out a way to beat the thing. Outside of trying to fool the crab into smashing itself into a wall, he had no clue how to go. Then, from a sudden memory of one of his clones, he knew what to do. And so did the other clones. From 100 voices at voices came a sound that filled the area. Raiten, Mabushi I Kagayaki. Even though he'd closed his eyes, the combined flashes nearly blinded him anyway. The crab, however, was in much worse shape. It was moving around erratically, swinging around and trying to catch one of the many clones with his pincers. The radius they'd cleared meant he failed to touch a single one of them. In a sudden flash of inspiration, the original yelled. Drain him. If it appeared like a clone, maybe it vanished like a clone did when his chakra was expended? The clones surrounding him started to tag him with draining hands as soon as they had an opening, and from the way the creature's movement slowed it seemed to have some effect. The crab finally disappeared in a puff of smoke, again, much like a clone. All clones took a breather while the original came down from his post. From what he'd seen, he'd lost at least 20% of his bunshins. It made him angry, though he thought having a summon was much more valuable now. It was like a clone except much more solid, and much stronger. Once he was down, a clone intercepted him. You thinking of trying the other one? He actually wasn't sure anymore. He'd need to try it someday, but wasn't sure if now was the right idea. What do you think? I think now's better than later, another clone interjected. Right now, we're ready, and we have a way of taking care of it if it's violent. Just keep a few clones with you ready to blind him if necessary, and everything should go fine. Naruto nodded and withdrew the scroll. This time as he was bloodying it all were looking, ready and prepared to jump into action, only for those preparations to be useless. When the smoke dispersed, a rabbit stood there. It wasn't even bigger than usual either. It was a simple black rabbit. The only thing bizarre was it had something tied to his back. Damn, it's been ages since I was on this side. Oh, and it talked too. The various clones dispersed and went back to their training, pretty sure the original could handle a foot-tall rabbit by himself. Said person approached the summon. A summoned rabbit? What, you got something against rabbits? I just don't see what use a rabbit summon could have for a ninja. You blind? Rabbits make great ninjas. Silent, stealthy, cunning. What else could a ninja need? I don't know. Power? Power is well and good, but all the power in the world won't beat an enemy you can't see. A good ninja doesn't always have to beat his enemies to succeed. A silent shadow has much more chance at gathering information, delivering documents, and infiltrating enemy camps than a man in shining armor. And no person can plan well for the bodyguard he doesn't know about. Naruto had to admit the rabbit had a point. You a ninja? The rabbit asked. Naruto nodded. He knew he hadn't passed the academy yet, but it was only a matter of time. Yes, you must suck. What? In what type of environment is your orange suit good for hiding? Naruto tried answering, he really did. Nothing came to mind though. Thought as much. Now, who the hell are you? Naruto Uzumaki. Never heard of ya. You related to the Kamisuji clan? Not that I know of. Then how did you summon me? Naruto withdrew the other white scroll from his back. Some of those still exist? We were pretty sure they were all destroyed. It's been quite a while since any of us rabbits have been summoned. You know if anything happened to the Kamisuji clan? Never heard of them. What country are they from? Grass. I'm a leaf ninja, so I have no clue. They might have died out. And where did you find those scrolls? In the forest around Konoha. Damn. The rabbit, now standing of 2 feet, stamped his left in frustration. Okay, so why did you summon me? I actually had a few questions. Shoot. How does one get a summoning contract? Why, you want to summon rabbits? You did a good job convincing me that rabbits made good ninjas, so I don't see why not. The rabbit puffed in obvious pride. You just have to sign a specific scroll that we rabbits have in our lands. Can you bring it with you? Nope. He handed the rabbit the second white scroll. Can this scroll bring someone who can? The rabbit looked at the scroll for a few seconds, and then shook his head negatively. Nope, this one summons me too. He pointed a specific set of characters on the scroll. See here? That's me, Ichibo. Then, Ichibo, how am I supposed to sign it? Only one way, go to grass. There's a place in grass where we can appear without being summoned. Go in the forest north of Hakutocho and summon me there. I'll lead you to it. Okay. Good, Naruto Uzumaki. I'll see you there. The rabbit vanished in a puff of smoke. Naruto wasted no time in summoning a dozen clones. He knew he'd need to summon a lot more soon, to replace those who had fallen to the crab, but those would wait until he'd started training in the Kagebunshin a little more. Looking at the new dozen, he ordered. You know what to do. Get to grass as soon as possible. Message me once you get there, and once more with the results of the meeting there. Oh, and try not to draw too much suspicion while getting there, okay? Okay. One thing, a clone training not too far interjected. How are they going to summon that rabbit once there? Using the scroll, of course. And how does that work? Well, you make a line in. Naruto stopped, thinking for a few moments. I see what you mean. Naruto finally admitted. I think I have a solution, another clone admitted. Naruto turned towards him and realized most of the bunshins in a radius around him had given up training, and were watching the unfolding conversation. Said clone dashed out of the basement of their new place, and came back a few minutes later with a specific sealing scroll. He unsealed its contents at Naruto's feet. Dozens of vials, pills and bandages unfolded, including more than a few empty vials. The false Naruto took some in his hands. Just fill these with blood, and then reseal them. The clones'll simply need to use those to activate the scroll. Naruto nodded, then took a kunai and opened a blood vessel. It took more than a few tries to succeed in filling all the vials, as the wounds kept closing before finishing up. Naruto then handed back the full vials to the clone who'd handed them. Here. You go with them, since you seem to know what to do. Sure. The Bunshin sealed the items back, then rose and gathered the dozen copies Naruto had summoned. The grass group was out the next minute and Naruto was back to his training. He wanted to have a little improvement in the clone's toughness before summoning another large batch. Japanese translations. Akiraka Jigoki. Akiraka obvious. Jigaku hell. High fire. Mabushii Kagayaki. Mabushii blinding. Kagayaki radiance. Saishu Hoden. Saishu final. Hoden electrical discharge. Tapa Nami Kyoha. Tapa breaking through. Nami wave. Kyoha surge. Tsukioni no Tsuno. Tsuchi earth. Oni demon. Suno horn. Sunazu no ori. Suna sand. Yuzu swirl. Ori cage. Kamasuji. Kami paper. Sugi cedar. Ichibo. Ichi 1. Bow staff. Hakutocho. Hakuto white peach. Cho town. Chapter 6, First into the breach. Ariko and her father, a clone they'd named Ichiro for the duration, were waiting in a restaurant in the civilian town closest to the eastern road leading to Leaf Village. They'd arrived late yesterday, and decided that it would be less suspicious for a rich merchant to stay at a roadside and then to arrive during late evening. They were now waiting on a ninja to escort them to Konoha. Both their henges included high-class clothes like those Naruto had already seen on rich bourgeois. Ariko was dressed in dark red, while her father wore a red a little brighter, but this one with a silver trim. Both shop and innkeepers had been on their best behaviors, something which Ariko deduced was due to the fact they seemed rich and the merchant were greedy. While an escort wasn't always necessary to get to Konoha, most people got guards to ensure they got there safely. Konoha provided so at the price of a D-ranked mission. It was sometime after the 11th hour when the Leaf Ninja they'd been waiting on appeared. Both Ariko and Ichiro had to hold back their reaction upon seeing who it was. They didn't expect this person to ever be put on a mission like this one. Uchiha Sasuke did a very small bow in front of the two civilians he was to escort. I understand you seek to visit Konoha. Ichiro broke out of his reverie and rose, bowing in turn to the ninja. Indeed, we do, ninja-san. My daughter Ariko wishes to be trained in the same arts that you practice. Sasuke turned and fixed the female civilian with a stare. Ariko's eyes locked with Sasuke's for a second, before she turned away, hiding her eyes. There had been rumors in the academy that his eyes could do a lot of things, from copying techniques to firing lasers, and she didn't want to test if they could see through a henge or notice that they were clones. At that reaction the Uchiha sighed. Another one of those insipid girls who'd keep bothering him about dates and such stuff. Konoha would be better without most of them, in his opinion. However, the mission was the mission, so he'd be bringing her to Konoha nonetheless. Follow me. The Uchiha turned and walked away, prompting the other two to follow. While Ichiro managed his role to perfection, Ariko couldn't help but sneak glances at the ninja who was still his rival. His I'm cooler than everybody posture hadn't changed, and neither had his walk. Both were specific enough that Naruto could remember them out of all of those of students who'd passed the academy. On the other hand, the Uchiha orphan felt and hated the fact that said girl was eyeing him. He only wanted to grow stronger, damn it, not draw in more girls. He was getting a headache at the simple thought of the size of his so-called fan club. Luckily, the way was short, and before long they were past the gates of Konoha. Ichiro, still well in his role, came again to the front. "Would you be so kind, Ninja-san, as to direct us? It might not be the first time I come to this village, but no other child of mine has enrolled in your academy. Sasuke, glad for something else to think than his fan club, waited no time before answering. "Follow this road. In about a kilometer, on the left, you'll find a large building in white. Enter there and find a teacher, he'll be more than able to help you along." "Thank you, Ninja-san." He bowed, and Iruka followed. "Here." He handed the genin a small bill. "Go buy yourself a treat with this." Sasuke bowed in thanks and turned back the way he came. He had no interest in staying with what was visibly a fangirl. As soon as the boy had turned her back to her, Iruka released the glare she'd been holding back the whole way. She couldn't wait to show the bastard one. And kick his ass as he so righteously deserved, too. When a cold shiver, stronger than any before, rose in his spine, Uchiha Sasuke silently vowed never to meet that girl ever again. He didn't ever want to know what perverse thoughts had prompted the bad feeling he just had. A knock on his door interrupted Iruka during his lesson planning. "Come in." A man in his middle years came in, followed by someone who was obviously his daughter. The teacher, however, recognized the form of the girl as the one from Naruto's prank and smiled. They'd at least made it up to here. "Good day, teacher. I've been sent here by a young ninja. You told me this would be the place to come to for training in the arts of the shinobi. My daughter, Iruka, is wanting to join your institution." "Good day, sensei," the daughter said, bowing. Come in," the chunin answered, closing the door. He had to agree that if he hadn't known in advance about the prank, he'd never have believed that both of these people were Naruto. Different inflections, stances, personalities. All in all, very good acting. Once Iruka was back in his chair, and he'd given a good look around, he relaxed and spoke. "We're alone, you can stop pretending, for now." In that instant the two people in front of the teacher relaxed. Their body language changed instantly, closer to what the chunin was used from this student. "How's the prank going, Iruka?" "Everything's according to plan, though we had a close one." What? "The ninja who escorted us to town," Ichiro continued, "was Sasuke." Iruka agreed that they could very much count it like that. "And he didn't notice anything?" "No." The chunin smiled. Good. "How's that good?" Iruka asked. Iruka took a deep breath. "Now, Naruto, I know you don't like him, but thinking in terms of members of your last class, Uchiha Sasuke is the one who had the largest and best chance of seeing through your disguises. He's also very adept at body reading, and has been close to you quite recently. If Sasuke didn't notice anything, then I'm pretty sure your disguises will hold in front of the other returning students." Both transformed clones nodded in agreement with that reasoning. "Now, both of you know what's next." Both shook their heads negatively at the question. "Okay. Right now, I'll have to test you, Iruka, for competency. During that time your father might stay, or simply might go out to do more things. Personally, I'd recommend going out and buying the place she'll use. We have a good 3 hours of tests to go anyway, so you might as well go on and continue with your plans." "Right," Ichiro said. Iruka, though, hung her head down and sighed. More tests, again. As Ichiro left the room, Iruka turned to her teacher. "What tests are those gonna be?" A one-hour physical evaluation, followed by 2 hours written exam." Iruka couldn't help but sigh once more. Ichiro wasted no time in leaving the school, and started walking around aimlessly around Konoha. Of course, that was only an image. In reality, the Naruto clone was steadily walking towards the closest of the houses the Naruto group had hoped to use for the disguised clones. There were 6 of them all around Konoha, spread randomly around the town. The supposition was that these buildings were either old living places of former Uraharas, or the homes of some of their more important contacts. 2 of those buildings were shops, along with 3 houses and some kind of storage depot, but they all had one thing in common: the Urahara tunnels crisscrossing under the city had an exit in each of those places. Amongst them only 2 were currently occupied, the storage depot, and one of the houses, and Ichiro was hoping he'd manage to buy out one of the empty houses for his daughter. Still acting as he should under his mask, it took him a good hour, going from person to person, to find the real estate agent responsible for the first of the 2 available houses. The man was at first surprised that such an old propriety would interest a wealthy merchant, but quickly got the relevant papers signed once he'd realized said merchant had other choices, belonging to other real estate agents. The Naruto clone going under the name Ichiro left under a mask that such a transaction was normal but was grinning inside. He still had nearly 3/4 of the money left out of his third, and had achieved the objective he'd had without any issue. The real estate agent, on his side, was happy to finally have sold such an unwanted location. Okay, stop," Iruka shouted, clicking on a button on the side of his stopwatch. Ariko, who'd been doing push-ups, sit-ups and various other forms of exercise for the last 15 minutes, pushed herself back up. She dusted herself pretty thoroughly before coming to stand in front of the teacher. "So, how are my results, sensei?" The differences between what Naruto would have done and what she did were evident to the Chunin. Where Naruto would have done something like a flip and wouldn't have cared about the dust, she did the very opposite. He'd have to ask later, when they were alone. Instead, Iruka answered. "Very good, actually. Your throwing is good, as is your speed. Your endurance is enormous for a woman. Your taijutsu is below average, though that to be expected from someone without much training. Physically, I see no reason not to include you in our next class." Actually, compared to Tenten, who was the last girl to come from outside, Ariko topped her everywhere except her throwing. With the class for now not being as full as the previous one, she was pretty much ensured a place as long as she didn't completely flunk in the written test. "Good," she replied, smiling serenely. "Now follow me, I have a classroom already prepared for your next test." "So, how's it going?" asked the real Naruto, coming out of the tunnel hidden behind a false wall. Ichiro had returned to the place he'd now mentally dubbed as Ariko's home, and sent a clone down the underground passages to get Naruto to come, which hadn't taken much time. "Everything's according to plan up to date. What about your side?" "Found out how to increase the toughness of clones actually, though it won't help." "Why?" "I found out that how much chakra a clone spends simply by existing is dependent on how tough it is, meaning the tougher they are, the less long they'll last. I actually made one who was nearly as tough as me, and could survive stab wounds like I do, and it barely lasted 3 minutes, and that while not using any techniques. The best compromise I found out was actually similar to the clones I made during the chakra draining training. Any tougher and the clones have to spend too much time draining things." "So that idea is a bust for training at the academy?" Ichiro asked. "Unfortunately." "Any idea on how we're going to do?" "Well, the council decided to put everyone on training to succeed at the chakra shield before school starts. Apart from that, not much." "No progress on the other techniques?" "Nope. I'm starting to think I might have made an error in mastering draining first." Ichiro was shocked. "Why?" "'Cause the clones don't train as hard as they did before. Before, they trained relentlessly till they dispersed themselves. Now, since they know they can live eternally due to the chakra draining, they take less risk as to stay alive longer. You remember how I trained to master the Kage Bunshin?" "Of course. With what happened while I was training, how many times would I have burst myself if I was a clone? And how many times has such a thing happened since we mastered the draining technique?" Ichiro thought a few moments while the original waited for an answer. He had to agree that he didn't remember any clone having burst from overtraining since they'd mastered draining. Lack of chakra, yes, but none from damages due to errors in training. Which with the fact that they'd have gotten the memories of such copies meant that it had happened very infrequently at best. I see your point. I don't think it's something conscious, just some basic survival instinct that clones now have because they can last longer. Unfortunately, that means there isn't much I can do about it. I'll think about that, Ichiro said, turning around. You going back to get Ariko? Yeah, she should be done by now. Anything special I should know? Outside the fact that Iruka is now pretty sure that any returning student won't see through our disguises, nothing really. Why that now? I'll explain later. We just met someone we didn't expect while coming to Konoha. Okay. See you later, Naruto exclaimed, plunging back into the tunnels. With only 17 minutes to go to the test, Ichiro entered the classroom that Ariko and Iruka were using as an exam center. The Chunin instantly shushed the so-called father, beckoning him closer with a finger and explaining him what was currently happening in whispers. The man took to silence well, taking a chair and waiting so patiently that Iruka for a moment forgot that this was actually Naruto. It took very little time for the Chunin teacher to grade the exam once Ariko was done. She'd done a good showing, actually better than Iruka had expected considering his latest scores. Well, now it's official. The teacher said, having just calculated her average score. It was more than enough to be accepted at the academy. I will be seeing you next Monday for your first class. This. Iruka handed her a folder from the top of his desk. Is the equipment you'll need starting next week. Congratulations on your acceptance, student. Ariko did a squeal that made even Iruka doubt it was Naruto inside all that, and jumped in the arms of her father in gratitude. The man shook Iruka's hand, thanking him for his help, and after filling out the various forms necessary, led his daughter out to celebrate. Now Iruka had already done infiltration missions before becoming a teacher, and couldn't believe the level of talent Naruto was demonstrating. He'd even worked with some considered to be naturals in that field, and never had they been able to make him doubt what he knew for sure as much as the show the two of them had done right now. Gathering the papers, the two clones had just signed, the Chunin was surprised to find amongst them a small note that he hadn't even realized had been slipped there. It simply said, basement at 5. Again, using the Urahara tunnel's exit closest to the academy, Iruka managed to arrive in Naruto's new basement a few minutes before 5. Once there, he was led to a conference room where 9 Narutos and Ariko, or a clone under an Ariko henge, possibly, were laughing and discussing the day, from the sound of it. Every conversation, though, died once he took a chair. So, everything's still fine? Naruto asked. You're the original, right? Iruka guessed. Yeah, how did you know? Your clones tend to defer to you in most conversations, leaving you to talk unless they have specific points to add. I simply guessed the first one to speak would be the real you. He opened a folder he brought with him. Yes, everything is still going according to your prank. And unless Konoha receives a dozen more applications more valuable than yours, Ariko is going to stay as an academy student. What do you mean, more valuable? The Ariko clone interjected. Konoha rates the value of each applicant to the academy on several criteria grouped mainly into 2 categories, those being status and potential. Status is all about where you come from. The best for Konoha being in order children from Leaf Ninja clans, children of Leaf Ninjas, children of longtime Konoha civilians, children of Konoha civilians, orphans and children of non-Leaf Ninjas. Why that order? And why the clans first? Mainly a loyalty issue. Academy teachers are supposed to check for infiltrators amongst the children, though those specific cases are rare. The order is based on who is probably more loyal to Konoha. So, technically, the original Naruto said, I fit at the bottom of the chart, just before children of outside ninja, right? Actually, I don't know, the Chunin answered. The specifics of your birth family are sealed, as is most information about your youth. You could actually come from any of those categories and I wouldn't know, though in your case and really makes no difference. Why? Sometimes academy students have sponsors, usually being the Chunin or Jonin who had found the boy. The Hokage being yours, your place was never in question. I'm pretty sure some did anyway, Naruto muttered darkly. I won't deny the possibility. Now potential is based on the evaluation Iruka and I made today. Konoha is sure to look out for people with the potential to become great ninjas, so the specific potential of each applicant also influences if he or she gets a place. Okay. So, you don't expect the academy is going to get enough new students to displace Iruka's application? Nope. At best during that time the academy will usually receive 6 or so applications, and that's counting the clone you're going to send. Miramaro, right? Right. So, I'm nearly 100% sure both your bunshins will be accepted. Good, Naruto exclaimed, falling into boss mode. Now on to other business, the next entrance. The civilian family, Iruka said. Exactly. We were having a problem with them, Naruto added, looking straight at Iruka. Which one? Jobs. The 2 civilians will need parents to evade suspicion, and those parents will need jobs to do the same. So, they'll need a job that we Narutos can do reasonably well. Unfortunately, all jobs I know are either directly linked to ninjutsu, which would draw attention by itself, or something I can't do well enough, like cooking. And building a property with apartments is probably way more costly than the budget I have. Very much so. Then, what job would be best for the 2 parents of my civilian identities? Iruka reflected for a few moments while the council waited for his answers. Normally civilians coming to Konoha were either merchants or artisans, and both had difficulties associated with them. Trade skills like blacksmithing or carpentry took time to learn to do well enough, so didn't fit with Naruto's time constraints. Outside of ninja equipment, which would be suspicious in the hands of a civilian family, Naruto had no goods to sell, which eliminated most merchants. Iruka started going backwards in time, thinking of the various people he met and their jobs. How about traders? Iruka inquired after a few minutes. Traders? The massive clone replied. Iruka sighed at how little his protege had been educated. Traders are a type of merchant who specialize in selling merchandise from other regions. What's the use? Not everything is as easy to get outside as it is in Konoha. For example, what do you know about Suna? Only that they have ninjas and that it's a desert? Iruka sighed at the reminder of his protege's lack of knowledge. So, what do they do about wood? Or cloth? I have no clue. They have to import it. And lots of the people doing so are regular civilians, making profit by buying merchandise where it isn't costly, like anything related to wood in Konoha, transporting them somewhere where it's rare and in demand, and selling it for a profit. It's perfect for your needs since it would logically take some time before you had stock, so nobody would be surprised if the shop you use isn't open for a while. It would also explain why one or both of the clones passing as the parents were missing, since traders are often away for business. But I'd need merchandise someday. How will I get it? You just send clones out. You compare how much it would cost in Konoha, and how much it costs wherever you are. If the difference is large enough, buy some as a test and see if you can sell them easily enough. Then buy more if there's demand. So, you're telling me to have more clones running around? Yes. The Chunin replied. But not in Konoha. In the village, the 2 clones you have looking around will be more than enough. Just send a few outside the village to check out factories and craftsmen, especially in other countries, as those have the most chance of being costly in Konoha. Thinking for a second, Naruto remembered he already had a team of clones on its way to grass, along with the solitary clone and the family of clones waiting for orders to come to Konoha. He'd message them with a clone as soon as this meeting was done. A good thing about that is that it could become your information network as you rise in ranks. Information network? Spies, answered the academy teacher. Amongst the higher ranks, many ninja have numbers of contacts that forward information in exchange for, usually, money or favors. This allows the ninja to have a good idea of what is going on outside Konoha most of the time, and helps when said person has missions in regions where he already has informants. It's especially useful for infiltration missions, as up-to-date information about the city or countries can make creating false backgrounds safer, and avoid other potentially dangerous situations. So, in short, you're saying that I should have a few more clones running around outside Konoha, checking for things to buy and sell at profit, correct? Correct. I suppose. The Iruka clone interjected. That the two clones inside Konoha that aren't studying would be the ones checking out prices inside the city? Either those or the parents themselves, Iruka answered. The parents would actually be better, as they could answer questions and pass scrutiny much more easily. They might even find a few people who want specific merchandise and are ready to pay for it. Okay. The original said. So, the Konoha clones start looking for prices as soon as tomorrow, and will be joined by the two parents once they're installed. The clones outside will use Kage Bunshin to generate some copies to look around other cities. Anything else? All the clones shook their heads negatively, and Iruka abstained from adding anything. Then let's all go back to the shield training, people. Yash. The various council members left while Iruka held the original back. He'd wanted to ask a few questions, and felt better at being one-on-one for once with his student. It happened so few times lately. So, what did you want to talk to me about? Naruto asked. You know what happened today with Iruka? I even remember it. Good, the Chunin exclaimed. Then can you explain me where you got the training you have in infiltration? What do you mean? You remember what you did after the physical test? What exactly? I mean, dusting yourself, the way you rose. Sure. Where did you get those? Sakura. Sakura? That's what she did each time after taijutsu practice. And the hug and squeal after the written test? FAI. That's what she did when her father came to get her after the final academy exam. FAI? Asakura FAI. He did a quick hinge, turning into a girl a little taller than himself. She was there the year before you came to the academy. She and I had a prank war for a month or so. She had a scary laugh that sent chills to most people. She passed the academy, but I haven't seen her since. And you remember her? Sure. Iruka taught for an instant. Can I test you on something? Sure. Taking a sheet of paper and a pen from the former place of a clone, he handed them to Naruto. Can you write down everyone you remember from the academy? Which year? All of them. Sort them by year if you can. Okay. Okay. And he started writing. Looking over his student's shoulder, the Chunin watched with slowly growing awe the paper Naruto was filling. As a teacher, Iruka had been on a first-name basis with the 60 or so students he'd taught during the past 2 years, but without the list growing in front of him he'd not have been able to name them all one after the other like Naruto was currently doing. And that's not counting that he'd been closer to them than Naruto had ever been. And the orange-haired boy was even able to go back 3 years and name students he'd never had. It was of course not perfect. Iruka could see a few errors in the names themselves, but a memory like that was more than he'd ever expected out of Naruto. Done. I'm missing a few names, but that's about it. Could you write down their descriptions? Sure. And he did. What about before that? Naruto made a face of disgust. You mean the orphanage? Iruka didn't pay it attention. Yes. Could you write down their names too? His student's face didn't change, remaining scrunched, but he wrote down name after name after name. The academy teacher was now beyond awe. No wonder the boy was so good with his fake personas. He had a veritable database of other students in his memory that he could use to build his false identities. The Chunin wondered what made this information stick while the classes didn't. Lack of practical application? The sabotaging of the teachers? He knew he'd worked at least at 5 different occasions with Naruto on his basic bunshin, but the boy hadn't improved. He was pretty sure he had the right information for that one, with the many times he'd forced the boy to repeat it to him. Done. Iruka came out of his thoughts to see that Naruto had finished filling the sheet with the information he asked, with hundreds of first names written down in 3 columns. No last names? They didn't use them over there. The way he said there explained clearly what he thought of the place. The Chunin was suddenly ashamed of having had to bring back these memories to his favorite student. You have an exceptional memory for people, the teacher said, as an explanation. The boy blushed at the praise. Smiling at the reaction, the Chunin rose. Keep up working at your prank like that, and I'm pretty sure I'll be seeing you graduate this year. Now, can you lead me back home? Naruto rose. Sure. The 2 friends left the room while Iruka was musing his favorite's hair. Japanese translations. Shiro no Koro. Shiro Castle. No Koro to remain. Hyojin Kiritori. Hyojin sharp, glistening sword. Kiritori cutting, tearing off, cutting off, clipping. Joka Joker. Chapter 7, Spreading Thick. Naruto's message to spread as a combined information/trading network had reached the dozen of bunshins with the remaining summoning scroll right as they were leaving Hakutocho. The group had made very good time mainly because of a fortunate discovery. They had an easier time with Kawarimi if they warped long distances. They'd tested while moving out of Konoha. A simple Kawarimi meant to move you 5 meters ahead failed 90% of the time, while one going for a distance of 20 or so meters actually succeeded half the time. At 100, they'd only failed once out of 50 or so tries, and farther from that was even better. They could easily manage 500 meters or more, with the record being a jump of somewhere around 4 kilometers. This led to a very bizarre game of tag between clones that went from the Leaf Village to the border of Fire Country, all in a single night. The group had rested and refilled its reserves once in Grass Country, and had managed to find the required village well before sundown. Upon receiving Naruto's orders, each of the copies had made another, and all the newly created ones spread out to gather information around in nearby cities. The others made a final few Kawarimis and reached the first trees of the forest. Unsealing all the necessary equipment, the lead clone worked the blood vials to trace a line down the summoning scroll. It took more than 2 complete containers before the scroll consumed itself, and before long Ichibo was back before the group. That was faster than I thought, was the first words that came out of his mouth as he appeared. Leaf Village was a week away from Grass, last I remembered. We found a good trick for covering long distances. I can see that. Is the original one of you? Nope. Damn. Ichibo patted the ground twice with his back paw in frustration. In that case, follow me. The dozen copies did so. The wood wasn't that large but was incredibly dense, and the path the rabbit took was more fitting of a labyrinth than a forest. It took an hour before the group reached a large clearing, in whose middle grew a tall tree amongst rocks. Wait a tick, okay. That said, Ichibo dashed towards the tree in a few bounds and disappeared between the rocks. It wasn't long before he was back, holding a scroll as tall as he was. He left it a meter or so before the group of now sitting Narutos and used it as a podium. Before I give you this scroll, I have a question to ask. Go on, the lead ninja answered. Why do you want to be a ninja? The rabbit asked. To be Hokage, of course. The whole set of orange ninjas nodded along. Hokage, that's the leader of your village, right? The Narutos nodded. Why do you want that? The group leader paused a moment before answering. The people in my village, they hate and fear us. Not because of anything we did, but because of something that happened when the original was born. We don't want it to be like that. Then we saw the old man. I mean, the current Hokage. He's respected, he's loved, and for good reason too. We want to be like that. We want to protect my precious people and have them see me as an equal, not as something that should be eliminated or tortured. And Konoha is a precious thing to me. Does that make sense? It does to me, the Black Rabbit answered. Though the blonde was like most people, thinking ninjas were cool because they were strong. That or his family pushing him in that direction. Ichibo was glad to see that the boy was there of his own decision, having a good idea what the job entailed. Here, Ichibo handed the lead Naruto the scroll. You deserve it. Thanks. This will allow me to summon all of you? No. This will summon my boss, the leader of all rabbits. He wants you to summon him in your burrow, and to meet you in person. My burrow? Your home. The place you summoned me first. Have the real one summons him like you did for me. K, thanks a lot. The lead clone put the scroll down in one of his pockets, then turned towards the rest of the group. Okay people, let's see if we can beat our previous speed and be back in Konoha before tomorrow night. YOSH. A second later, all the Narutos were gone. Ichibo, however, turned to face the tree in the center of the clearing. So, what do you think? Dispelling the genjutsu that had hidden him, the lead figure answered. He is different, I will give you that. He is untrained in the dance of battle, but has great spirit, another added. The third figure said nothing. He smells of fox though, the leading one said. He already has a contract? Not that I know of, Ichibo answered. He didn't seem to know much about summoning at all. The rabbit waited a moment. So, your feelings? We will see, the leading figure smiled. After coming back from escorting his teaching friend home and messaging his far-off clones, Naruto paused to look at the massive clones training in his underground base. All of them were now training on the chakra shield technique, hoping to have it down before the week ended and classes restarted. None of the Narutos had even gotten close yet. Jumping between two rock pillars, the original shinobi came to rest atop one. He'd been using this particular spot as a training area for the last few days, right after he'd used it as a lookout while battling the summon crab. The best thing about it was that he could easily see all around without much trouble, and the fact that his clones could find him without much effort. After a quick look around to see if anyone needed his help, Naruto sat down and focused on the specifics of this technique, as they had been written on the scroll. There weren't many. The technique was, in essence, very easy. It had no seals or other movement, only raw application of chakra. It was all about compressing said energy and using it as an extra layer of skin. Looking back to the sea of orange training below, Naruto quickly realized they were all going at it in similar ways, each releasing chakra in bursts and trying to make it solid, if only for a second. It didn't seem to be making much progress either. He'd try something different, then. Naruto released his chakra in one continuous surge, a blue aura of power forming around his entire body. Now, compressing it. He said to himself, trying to force his own energies to his will. So, you expect to be in Konoha in 2 days? Yup, the caravan master said. Just make sure to be here at 8 tomorrow morning. If you or yours ain't there, we'd be leaving without you. No worries, sir, the lead clone answered after a look at his family. We will be there. Perfect. The group of Naruto left the caravan depot toward the motel they had rented earlier. The decision to use such means to enter the Leaf Village had come upon seeing one such caravan on the way to the city they were currently in, and had decided as a group that this way would be much more normal for a civilian family. They'd rented a place in the biggest caravan they'd found in the city that was continuing to Konoha, claiming that the previous caravan they had taken had gone no farther than this point. Now back in the privacy of their shared room, the group released their transformations, saving up chakra that way. So, how many clones should we make? The Naruto impersonating the father asked. Ha! Well, the clone added. You did notice we received a message to spread clones outside Konoha? The 3 others nodded. Why should we create more than one each? I'll answer you with a question. Did you notice how many caravans were in town? And how many destinations they covered? I have a good idea about the number, but not so much about the destinations. The two other clones shook their heads negatively. I have to agree most caravans' final destination is wind, but they have different way of getting there. Grass, river, bird, rain, those are all on the path to wind. We already have a team in grass. Added one of the children clones. But none in the others. And that list doesn't include all those not passing by wind. I saw caravans going to waterfall, vegetable and rice field along with one going by sea to tea country. If we send clones in all of those, we have a good third of all the great countries covered. Point, said the second of the child clones. I think I can manage a good 5, how about you? That night, 30 more copies stealthily left the motel that the false family was using, and by the next day they were on their way outside of Fire Country. Shiro Nokora was a proud chunin of the Leaf who, as was usual for him, was assigned the surveillance of a part of the tall stockade surrounding Konoha. It was a job he'd done more than any other in his life, and that he was satisfied as such. Having been to such a post for a long while, he'd thought he'd seen everything outside of full-out war. That was why, 2 hours into his guard shift, he was graced by the sight of something he'd never expected to be possible. There was a boy climbing the wall. And by climbing he didn't mean wall walking. He'd already seen some of those new genins having just been taught the method, trying to prove themselves great by climbing the tallest building they could see. Those climbing the wall usually got off lucky, at least compared to those trying the same on the Hokage monument. The ANBU were much less forgiving on average. No, this kid was doing it the old-fashioned method, with a knife in each hand and some kind of spike on his shoes. Shiro had to admire the guts the kid had. The wall itself was taller than most buildings in the city and was hard rock. If he missed, the fall would surely kill him. The chunin decided to wait until he'd finished his ascent, or to catch him if he fell. It took an hour for the boy to finish his climb. The wall guard had to give it to the boy, he had stamina, especially considering he didn't look a day over 12. Dispelling the genjutsu he'd used to hide himself, the chunin asked, "Is there any reason why you did that?" Surprised, the boy turned while jumping to the side. Good reflexes, Shiro noted, though his balance could use some work. How did you get here? The kid said, his weapons, 2 knives so dulled by the climb he would have hurt a fly with them, in a decent offensive position. A ninja never tells his secrets. You're a ninja? The boy's face changed instantly, a big smile shining on it. This is Konoha, right? Shiro nodded. I want to join. The face became pleading. You want to be a ninja? Yeah. And what do your parents have to say about that? The face the boy made answered all of the chunin's questions. Rage, sadness, pain, loneliness, all mixed together. Either the boy's parents died recently, or he'd been abandoned not so long ago. Tell you what. He changed the subject. I still have 2 hours before my break, so I'm going to test you until then. If you do good enough, I'll bring you to the academy for enrolling, okay? The boy's face teared up again, but this time in happiness. Thank you. He cried out, bowing as he did. What's your name? Muramaru. Don't thank me yet, Muramaru. Shiro smiled. He then put him to the test. The whole works, push-ups, sit-ups, throwing, dodging, even a mock battle. The kid impressed him again, nonetheless. He lasted the whole 2 hours without complaining or rest. Sure, he wasn't perfect, his throwing was horrible and his taijutsu needed a lot of work, but the boy was fast, dodged well, and his stamina was high even for being a kid full of energy. Come his break, he had no choice but to uphold his end of the bargain. Bringing him to the academy, he noticed another thing he liked in the boy: he was focused. He passed the whole way to the ninja school in silence. Sure, he was looking around on both sides, but he went the distance in silence, even though Shiro was sure he had 100 questions. Once in the building, he made his way to Iruka's door, and a single knock had the teacher opening the way to his office. "Nokoro-san, what can I do to help you?" "Yumano-san, I have a child for you." Yumano Iruka was of the same genin class as he was, though contact between them had been rare after that time. They had gone in too much different ways, in the end. Shiro brought the boy forward. "He is someone without parents, and has made his way here to be able to enroll as a ninja." "I will take care of him, Yumano-san," someone said behind them. Turning around, both Shiro and Iruka noticed another Chunin had joined them. The wall guard knew him well, having been in a team under his leadership at many a time during his genin days. "I have no problem in doing his inscription, Hyojin-san," Iruka replied. "You have already missed 2 days and are probably still late on your work," Hyojin Kiritori stated in his habitual neutral tone. While many found this peculiarity of his speech condescending, Shiro knew that this way just his way. He still sounded like an Aburame though. "Since my own preparatory work is complete, it is better for all that I take care of it." "If you say so." Iruka relented. "Good day then, Nokoro-san, Hyojin-san." He then retreated into his office. Both he and Muramaru followed the older instructor to the door of his own office, where said person turned to the boy. "Can you wait for me in my office while I talk to Nokoro-san here?" "I won't be long." "Sure," the boy said, leaving the two to their conversation. "I didn't know you had asked for a job as an instructor," Shiro noted as soon as the boy was gone. "Sandame-sama personally came to see me as soon as the debacle with Mizuki was over," he said, rare emotion entering his word as he spoke the traitor's name. "It fit well with my plans, also." "Your plans?" "I am getting old, Shiro," he said, sighing. And it was true. For a ninja, he was in his late 50s, past retirement age. "And with what happened with the Kyubi, I'm the last of my clan. But I swore to my father when he taught me our clan style that I would do everything I could for it not to die. So I have been looking for the past 3 years for someone that could carry my legacy. A child I could train to be the next master of the sharp fist. And? Nothing. I've looked at the last 3 graduating classes, and all those with talent for taijutsu end up being clan members already using a specific style. And I won't let my clan style be assimilated by another. What about this Rock Lee kid? Guys screaming to all corners that he's the next taijutsu master of Konoha. True, he has the potential, but my style needs chakra usage to be fully mastered. He unfortunately couldn't make the cut." He sighed again. He obviously cared about his style very much. It was the most emotion he'd seen in the man ever. Now, to come back to what I wanted to ask," Kiritori added. "How did you come by the boy?" "You won't believe me." "Do tell." "He climbed the wall." "He already knows how to use chakra?" "No, not that I know of. He climbed the old-fashioned way." Both were silent for a moment. "That is impressive. He might be what you're looking for. He's got at least speed and endurance, and while his combat skills are nothing to write home about, it would at least allow you to start from scratch." "I will see." "What about his family?" "Either dead or having abandoned him. His face told me as much." "Do you want me to put you as the boy's sponsor?" Shiro thought for an instant. "Why not? He deserves it for what I put him through." "You need anything else from me?" "No." "Then, I'll be leaving him in your capable hands while I return to the wall." "Good day." "Good day," the instructor said as the other ninja disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Entering his office, he found the boy seated on the chair reserved to guest. Said child quickly turned around to look at him. "I do not know if Shiro introduced me to you, so I will do so. My name is Hyojin Kiritori, and I will be the taijutsu instructor starting next session." The boy raised his hand. "Yes?" "Taijutsu?" "Combat with either the body or with weapons." Now, can I have your name? Muramaru. The Chunin wrote it down. Family name? The child's face tensed and lowered. I don't have any family. I am sorry if this causes you pain, but I need complete information to do your inscription. So your family name would be? Joka. The boy's face didn't rise. Place of residence? None. The questions continued in the same vein for a good 30 minutes. It took a good 10 of those for the boy's eyes to get back up, but by the end he was smiling as if nothing had happened. Kiritori had learned a magic word to make the boy's spirit rise back up. Ninja. As Miramara started in the physical evaluation that came with wanting to be a ninja, the Chunin couldn't help but notice exactly what his past subordinate had told him earlier. He had been right, this kid might have been the exact person he'd been waiting for. For Iruka, the day passed with agonizing slowness. He'd expected to be the one writing in both of Naruto's prank inscriptions into Konoha Academy, but couldn't find anything on the spot to oppose the words of the elder Chunin. And the worst was he was right. He was still late in his preparations. Worst was, Iruka had passed the whole afternoon juggling from supply notice to student annulations to weapon requisition form, all the while going at half his usual speed due to anxiety. And the knowledge of the problem did anything but help. Hyojin Kiritori, who'd been chosen by the Hokage to replace Mizuki, was something of a legend in the Chunin circles. A taijutsu specialist of high grade, while not on the level of Madogai, he was one of the few Chunin to be consistently given A-rank missions. The rumor was he'd turned down the Jonin rank at least twice, for reasons unknown though, again, widely gossiped about. He was probably one of the top Chunin in Konoha. He was more than good enough to be able to see through disguises. So Iruka stressed continuously, expecting every second to have Naruto surgeon telling him his prank had been seen through, or his college notifying him of an infiltration attempt. He nearly hit the ceiling when someone knocked on his door in the late afternoon. Kiritori came in right after that, and handed him the registration papers. While placing the various sheets in their respective folders, Iruka couldn't help himself but ask questions. So, what should I expect of our newest student? Probably a taijutsu specialist, his college answered. Full of energy. Very focused. Iruka boggled internally at that. I have high hopes for the boy after he's unlocked usage of his chakra. However, his scores in the written evaluation are borderline, so you and Kazuhi might have issues with his work. All in all, a good match for most students. Okay, Iruka answered. His concentration wasn't fully there, but he was glad that Naruto's plan was still underway without any great issue. Do you need me for anything else? The elder Chunin asked. Iruka quickly checked through the various papers he had been handed, verifying if they were complete. No, it seems everything is filled completely. You can go. I'll also be leaving as soon as this has been properly placed. I will see you tomorrow then. When Iruka entered Naruto's underground training facility, he was graced with the sight of something akin an all-out war. Each and every clone in sight was fighting. Fighting each other. They were visibly restraining themselves, battling only using their fists, feet and kunais. Iruka waited at the end of the tunnel he had taken, looking around, when he finally noticed what they were doing. They were training. They had some kind of technique Iruka didn't know, one that allowed them to block attacks with just about any part of their body. Just now the Chunin had seen a Naruto bat away a kunai with his head, all without bursting. It was pretty impressive. A single more minute allowed Iruka to find what he expected was the original Naruto. He was standing on one of the many rocky protuberances the place had, and was the only one not actively fighting. He also frequently summoned more Kage Bunshins, which is how the academy teacher had spotted him. Making his way there, Iruka marveled at the training. With the sheer amount of clones working, he'd gained mastery at a rate that was unbelievable. Jumping, when he landed right beside his most unpredictable pupil, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of him. Good evening, Naruto. Evening, Iruka. He did a quick look around. How did you manage to find the real me? Easy. First, you're not fighting. Second, I'm pretty sure your clones can't use Kage Bunshin as much as I've seen you use it. He scratched behind his head. Well, you caught me, he said, smiling. I'd like to talk to you, so, could we move someplace a little quieter, please? Sure, 1 second. Once more doing the specific hand sign necessary for his jutsu, the academy student called into being the largest wave of copies up to date. He then turned to the one closest to him. Pass the message, I want you clones to continue fighting until there's only a single one left, okay? Okay, the clone answered. A second later he was beset by kunais coming from various points, including the original. He managed to block the first 5, but the 6th turned him back into smoke. Let's go, Naruto then exclaimed. He led Iruka back into the room the Chunin had seen the last time he was here, however this time the council was absent, and only the 2 of them were present. The Chunin did not wait a second and took a chair opposite his favorite student. So, is everything going fine? Naruto said as soon as his teacher was no longer standing. Yes, but I have a question first. What exactly was going on down there? Training. I'd noticed. What kind? A banned technique from the Scroll of Seals. It simply allows one to create a hard skin made of chakra to block. Why train in that one? You do know my clones will have to participate in whatever taijutsu training there will be during class, right? They'll need something like this simply to survive whenever we have free-for-all sparring. True. He hadn't thought about that possible solution. Iruka had been planning on keeping Naruto and or one of his clones for the taijutsu exercises, under various pretenses. Only one would be going, and that would have been the true Naruto under Henge. He was glad that the boy had found another way, as his plan was pretty risky. You should be more careful about training in those, you know. They were banned for a reason. Yeah, I know, but I'm pretty sure this one was mostly banned due to politics. Why would that be? It interferes with the Hyuga Juken. Iruka whistled and nodded. He had to agree with the conclusion Naruto had come to. The Hyuga clan had much in the way of political power, and they were well known to oppose anything that limited the power of their style. Be careful anyway. No worries. My clones already went through every technique, removing those that were dangerous to me in any way, which didn't include anything related to chakra exhaustion, as Naruto was pretty sure it was impossible for him. He paused for an instant. Now, how went my latest clone's inscription? You probably know better than me. Iruka answered. Then how about we trade information? Asked Naruto. Perfect with me. Naruto then explained everything from climbing the wall to the moment when the academy teacher had left him, after applying and being given a budget as an orphaned academy student. Iruka added whatever comments Kiritori had given him. I have a question though. Iruka said at the end. Ask away. Kiritori-san said you were very focused. How? That's just the personality I decided for Muramaru. Is there any issue with that? Are you sure you won't have any problem keeping up that appearance during class? He waited an instant. Not to be insulting, but you aren't the most focused boy in the classroom. Are you sure you will be able to keep that appearance up? Sure. I can be focused when I want to. Remember that time with the tags? You know, the one 2 years ago? It took some time before Iruka remembered that specific moment, but he groaned once he did. After a week without pranks, Naruto had managed to put explosive tags in every single place Iruka could have thought of. Luckily those had been training tags issued for the academy, those being generally as strong as a simple firecracker. He'd even managed to chain them in specific ways, like those he'd used to make every single drawer in the room open abruptly before their contents exploded out. Iruka had to admit the level of focus necessary for such a prank was much more than he'd ever shown in class. Then, why didn't you show that focus in the academy? 'Cause it's boring. Those tests you give out, I've already done them, Most of those lectures I've already had. When I go to school, I want to be taught something new and useful, not something boring and useless. For the prank it won't be a problem, since it's for a prank, but the rest of the time it's not worth the effort. It's not like you're teaching any new ninjutsu, after all. Before Iruka could answer anything, a clone entered the room at high speed. "Boss, you gotta come down here," he said. "Why?" "The clones you sent to Grass are back." "And why didn't you use a clone to message me?" "We did. 3 times even. You just didn't receive it, it seems." The Naruto copy answered. While Iruka followed Naruto back down, he was thinking about the speech Naruto had given him. He had to agree that any kid having to do the same thing twice wouldn't be interested the second time. And most exams were similar in most points. There had to be a way of making it more interesting. Once back into his training room before the delegation sent to Grass, Naruto waited no time. "Back already?" "Yup," the lead Bunshin answered. "Didn't I tell you to message once you were there?" "You did and we did. It's the first time we heard that a message didn't come through. I think it's because we're starting to have too many clones. Probably something to do with multiple clones dispersing at the same time. Troublesome." The original said, copying Shikamaru. "Anyway, how did you manage to get from here to Grass and back in less than a week?" "We found something, boss." The Bunshin waited a moment. "You know the problems we have with the replacement technique?" The real Naruto, along with most of the clones standing around him, nodded. "Well, it's all a matter of distance. The farther we move with the technique, the easier it is." "Impossible," Iruka interrupted. "The replacement technique may not have set limits, but anything beyond 100 meters can't be done." "Want to bet?" The clone answered. He pointed towards one of the many rocky spires rising from the ground. "How far would you estimate that spike to be?" The Chunin looked carefully. 300 to 400 meters, at least." "Look hard." The clone did the required hand signs in a flash, and a large rock took its place. Turning around, Iruka saw that it had switched itself exactly the distance it had said, and was now standing and waving from the top of said rock. A second later, he was back, having replaced himself back with the same stone. "Enough proof for you?" he said, smirking. Iruka nodded in shock. The replacement technique was ear-ank, and the idea that someone could move so far on so little chakra was preposterous. You'd need to overload the jutsu incredibly too. The gears started turning into the Chunin's mind. Unless you overload the jutsu, such distances were impossible. In all the techniques Naruto knew, some were impossible to overload, like Kage Bunshin, while he had issues with every single technique from the academy, which took very little chakra. Except the transformation technique, but since his was different from any other it might be much more demanding in terms of chakra. "Hey Iruka," Naruto asked. The Chunin waved his student into silence. Gathering all his reserves, he tried doing exactly what he had asked for the last exam at the academy, 2 normal Bunshins. Only this time, he wanted to overload them as much as possible. Going through the needed hand signs, he channeled as much chakra as he could in the technique, all the while limiting himself to 2 clones. Said clones appeared. They were, however, similar to the last 2 normal clones Naruto had summoned. Their skin was clammy and they were visibly sick, and vanished less than 2 seconds after appearing. "I finally understand," Iruka finally said, breathing hard. "Why the normal clones didn't work for you." All the Narutos turned towards him in unison. "Why?" "It wasn't lack of effort, as I'd thought, but too much effort. You were putting too much chakra in the technique, and that's why it always failed." "Oh," they all answered. "That's good that we finally found out," the teacher added. "Especially since your 2 clones in the academy have to be proficient in that technique, especially if you want them to stand out for you." "Right," the true Naruto said, while all others fell silent. It took a few minutes before he turned back to the group coming for grass. So, since I didn't receive the message, how did it go with Ichibo? Here. The leader of the clone group said, tossing him the scroll. You need to summon this guy. Chapter 8, Final Preparations. Here. The leader of the clone group said, tossing him the scroll. You need to summon this guy. Catching the scroll, Naruto eyed it carefully. After the debacle with the crab, he was more careful with summoning than he'd been before. Who is it supposed to summon? The boss of the rabbits. Thinking a few moments, the original student answered. Why don't you go over what happened since you left? The clone group did so, each speaking in turn to complete what the previous had started, which made the conversation difficult to follow. Not helping was the fact that the various explanations sparked some memories inside Naruto. He evidently remembered some form of what happened, but not consciously. Fortunately, or unfortunately, this wasn't the time to dwell on such things. So, in short, the blonde ninja said, once the explanation was winding down. The guy this thing summons is the one who'll decide if we make the cut or not. True. The group of Bunshin nodded. What do you think, sensei? Iruka jolted out of his thoughts at that phrase. Sorry Naruto, I wasn't paying attention. You were saying? He asked. Said boy quickly gave a quick description of the various discussions with, and about the rabbit summons for his teacher. Iruka was originally appalled at the risks his student had taken, but couldn't argue with the results. So, what do you think? Naruto added, seeing that the Chunin was still pondering what he had said. After a few seconds of not finding any point to argue, the teacher nodded. I can't find any reason not to summon this rabbit leader of yours. I doubt it could be a trap, and even then the sheer number of clones would pretty much ensure an escape. Just don't be afraid to run if it gets dangerous. Also, prepare a large space. I've heard that some of the boss summons are quite large. The Bunshin started moving at said words. Okay. Can I stay here and watch? I've never seen any of the boss summons, so it would be a learning experience for me also. No problem, his student answered, unrolling the scroll on the ground before him. He then took one of his kunai, slashed open a finger and spread the blood in a line in a smooth motion. The scroll reacted instantly, consuming itself while emitting copious smoke. It, however, quickly dispersed, and the rabbit boss was now standing there. For all Iruka had said Rabbit wasn't large at all. He was 1 or 2 inches taller than the Chunin, and was standing in a similar way as any human. He wasn't wearing much, but was covered with pale gray fur. His only accoutrements were a leather strap holding a bag full of staves in his back, and a pair of black gloves with steel plates made for his animal hands. As soon as his eyes opened, he fixed Naruto with a stare. Naruto stood there, impassive. After a full minute where Naruto stood still while Iruka stressed, but refrained from moving, the summon lifted his stare. The pressure that had been there evaporated in an instant. The rabbit sniffed, then smiled. I can see you're something special, Kit. Naruto relaxed at those words, and smiled. It was the shy smile Iruka saw rarely, like the time he'd given the boy the money for his prank. He relaxed also. I am Nanaboo, leader of the rabbit summons, and Ichibo has interceded in favor of you signing the rabbit contract. The non-human figure did any few seals, which seemed bizarre considering his hands, and 2 other rabbits appeared. One was a little shorter than Naruto, was wearing clothes similar to those of a samurai with 2 swords hanging from his side, and had his ears tied together. The other was a normal rabbit, the same size as Ichibo had been. It had 2 weapons consisting of 2 differently sized short blades on wooden handles hanging somehow on his back. Both were pure white. These 2 will be the ones testing you, the summon leader said before turning to his subordinates. Miyamoto, test his ability at surviving first with Monty, then his ability to learn. Yes, master, said Rabbit replied, bowing. During that time, I'll look around the city with you, he added, looking at Iruka. Is that okay with you? Iruka, who had been up until now a spectator, was surprised at his inclusion in the plans. I don't see why I couldn't. He answered. Good, the animal boss added. Why can't we wait until I'm done with the tests, and we all go together? Together. Naruto said, his tone a little whining. Iruka held back a sigh. Sorry Kit, but we'll probably end up in a bar somewhere, and I don't think you're cleared for alcohol yet. Naruto pouted but didn't argue. As soon as the two tallest of the group left, Naruto turned back toward the one dressed as a warrior. So, how are those tests going to be? First, Uzumaki-san, as you have heard, Monty here. The rabbit pointed down to the smallest of the group. We'll test your ability to survive. How? He will fight you. Your goal is not to defeat him but to survive. That's all? No limited techniques? Yes, Uzumaki-san. It will be much more difficult than you expect, I gather. The rabbit paused for a second. Are you ready? Naruto twisted his neck twice in preparation. Sure. Monty, non-lethal. Go. Said rabbit blurred. The rabbit crossed the few meters separating them in an eye blink, and saw the two weapons bare inches from his face a fraction of a second before reality blinked. Disoriented, the academy student quickly realized what had happened the moment a clone's memories surged in his mind, accompanied by the sound of an uncorking bottle. A clone had switched with him at the last instant, saving his neck. Hearing something rushing towards him, he switched again, this time landing on the farthest pillar from his point of origin. By now the clones had realized what was going and were once again trying to attack en masse, though the only result was the rhythmic sounds of uncorking bottles as said clothes were decapitated. Seeing his bunshins going down at high speed, he quickly created a new batch, 2 to 300, before switching again. This time he didn't wait, and as soon as he appeared he called out Raiten, knowing his clones would get the meaning. And they did. A second later too many flashes to count filled the room. Naruto was happy to hear that the dreadful popping sound stopped at that instant. And restarted a second later, once again coming closer. Naruto switched while swearing in his head. How did that bunny track him? As soon as he reappeared, the death of a clone gave him a good idea. Sound. Noise. He cried out, right before switching. This time it took longer for the clones to catch on, but they quickly did. One by one, they all started making noise. Some clapped their hands or stomped the ground. Some started singing, some yelling, some whistling. A few even started telling jokes. The effect, however, was immediate. The rabbit no longer tracked him unerringly, and started eliminating the clones closest to him instead. It then became a stalemate, with Monty eliminating clones as quickly as Naruto created them. After a full minute of this, the samurai rabbit Miyamoto had enough. Monty, stop. As soon as those words were uttered, the small summon was back where he had been originally, as if he'd never moved. Naruto, on his side, switched back before the two rabbits, breathing a little hard. Good enough showing, I suppose. The samurai said. Monty, unmoving, said nothing. Overtaken by curiosity, Naruto couldn't help but ask. Does he talk? He never did, to my knowledge, Miyamoto answered. I am not even sure his true name is Monty. He does answer to it, however. He paused for a second. Can I ask a question? Sure. Why did you not flee using your technique? Survival was the goal, not defeat. This, the blonde needed to ponder. It took him a few moments before he came up with an answer. I didn't really think about the option. My main goal was to deal with his speed and tracking ability. I don't think I could have done that while dodging him in a narrow corridor, he finally replied. A valid answer. Now for the second test. The rabbit paused. Have you been trained in the way of the sword? No. Perfect. Now if you can get something to train with, be it a sword, Bakuto, Shurnai. The samurai enumerated, his eyes closed. The clone closest to the exit disappeared for a second, only to reappear a few seconds later beside Naruto loaded with dozens of sword-like weapons. Sheath, a thin plank, a cane, even a branch would do. He finished, finally looking at Naruto, who was in the process of selecting a katana. Miyamoto choked a little. Those will be fine, I think. Now take your sword like this, he instructed, demonstrating with his own sword. And take this position. Monty, still looking, stood there silently. The summon named Nanaboho had not lied. He'd entered the first bar Iruka had pointed out and had gotten them a private booth. He had been helped by the fact that he'd hidden his natural appearance under a genjutsu that, to the Chunin's eyes, was flawless. He was now, outside his gray hair and eyes, a totally forgettable person. He'd ordered a strawberry liqueur for himself, while Iruka took a simple Konoha beer. As soon as they received their orders, the bunny leader stepped up. Now that we have drink, let's get to the real reason we're here. Which is? I want you to describe me your student, Naruto. Why me? You could have asked him. Yes, but a herd knows its members well. A friend knows even better. A person might underplay or overplay his own abilities, but a real friend would not. So, tell me about this boy who wants to summons the rabbits. Well, how could I describe him? He's someone very friendly and energetic. And loyal also. He tends, however, to be very lonely, and keeps his emotions to himself. He's much brighter than he looks, and can think outside the box at the best of times. Iruka was ticking down fingers. Sadly, he's not one for the usual school environment, and I have much difficulty having him focus on his classes. Between that and his pranking, he makes the academy interesting, to say the least. So, he's a prankster? The rabbit said, smiling. The Chunin did not notice, stuck in reminiscence. The very worst. Not a month ago he painted graffiti over the carving of the previous Hokages, he pointed out. Over the face of your leaders? Yes. Wahahaha. Nanaboho couldn't help himself and laughed heartily. He can see he's a handful. Yes. Apart from that, the academy teacher became more reticent. He hasn't really been treated properly. How come? Well, he's an orphan. And no one cared enough to adopt him. He's been alone since forever, and doesn't make friends easily. Iruka was silent after that, not wanting to get into dangerous territory. It seemed, however, to be painting a good enough picture for the Rabbit King. That's all fine and good, but there's one thing missing. What's the link between him and foxes? Iruka tried not to react, he really did, but even the partial stumble was damning enough for the creature in front of him. You know, he said. I can't say anything, the Chunin replied. Wait, this is Konoha, right? That would mean. Then he. Iruka's eyes filled with fear. He was watching a train wreck in slow motion, but was powerless to stop it. Wahahaha. Laughter? That wasn't what he'd expected. The foxes will be trying to one-up us for centuries after that. He kept on laughing. The teacher didn't understand anything anymore. Explain, please. His voice was fierce, but his companion didn't seem to be offended. It took a few seconds for Nanaboho to get his breath back. The fact is, generally, the relationships between animal summons emulate those of the animal they represent. That's why the snake and frog courts have always been opposed, one is naturally prey to the other. It would normally be the same between rabbit and foxes, if not for one thing. We are both known to be trickster spirits. Okay. So that makes the relations between us two more like rivals than actual enemies. Our fights are pranks we do one another or occasionally on other animals. Iruka motioned to continue. Added to that is the fact that the foxes were always somewhat proud that the Kyuubi was a fox. They didn't like its methods at all, but it was the strongest, and it was a fox. Nanaboho smiled. And now the vessel for the Kyuubi, who the fox court would have given their tail to have, is asking to be a member of the rabbit court. Wahahaha. He started laughing again. The laughter was quite a bit hysterical and Iruka couldn't help but smile. It was, he had to admit, a reaction he hadn't seen coming. And he understood, that was the worst. It really doesn't bother you? The Chunin had to ask. What, you really think that the mighty Kyubi would want to sign the rabbit contract? He started on laughter even more hysterical than previous. Iruka himself released a bark of laughter at the image of the Kyubi, great destroyer taller than Konoha, trying to sign a scroll not even 2 feet large. It took a while before the laughter died down, and Nanaboho took the opportunity to finish his glass. Well then, the kids got my vote at least. I haven't laughed that hard since I glued bunny ears to the foxes and stopped them from realizing with genjutsu. Iruka smiled at the image of rabbit-eared foxes. It was pretty evident that this guy and Naruto would get along famously. One last thing then before we go back. He once again did a number of hand seals, though they were recognizable this time. A small black rabbit with a staff popped on the bench beside the bunny leader. Yo, Kage. It said. Kage? Iruka asked, curious. Ever since he learned that the ninja leaders are called Kages, he's been calling me such. He's been wanting to be a ninja ever since he knew the definition of the word. He paused. Ichibo. Yes. Yes. On the matter of the swearing of Naruto Uzumaki, what is your vote? Nanaboho said, solemnly. I vote yes. Additionally, I would be proud to be a member of his battle herd and to serve as his burrow guard. The black rabbit answered head down but voice straight. Nanaboho was visibly surprised. You sure? With my life. The rabbit leader thought for a moment before nodding. Well, you always wanted to be outside, so this is your chance. Thank you. The smaller rabbit bowed deeply. Iruka had held up asking questions not to interrupt what was visibly an important moment, but now couldn't resist asking. So, what was all that? Okay, to explain, someone's battle herd is the group that accompanies one in battle, only to a greater degree. The closest thing that comes to mind in human terms is brother of war. A burrow guard, however, is an honorary position given to a rabbit who guards, at all time, the burrow of an important person, such as an expecting mother or revered elder. Basically, what Ichibo meant was that he would accompany Naruto everywhere and fight with him. He paused for a second. You are his teacher, correct? Yes. Ichibo, in addition to convincing Naruto, I want this man agreement before anything is finalized. Now, Iruka had seen 2 years of academy students, and considered himself pretty resistant to the various puppy dog eyes he had faced in his career. Naruto was one of the rare children who still had an effect on him, and that was mostly due to their similar lives than anything. He considered it a point of pride that he had stood firm before those of an actual puppy, as Kiba had trained Akamaru to produce the effect on demand. Akamaru had nothing on Ichibo. Well, the teacher found himself answering. The Inuzuka do have their dogs. I can't really say no. The small rabbit started hopping and dancing madly on the table, saying thank you, thank you, thank you. All the while. Well, Nanaboho added. Now that this is done, how about we see how our prospective summoner is doing? Let's. Iruka said, rising. Now third, then fifth. No, not like that, keep your weapon straight. Yes, better. Miyamoto said as Naruto followed his instructions. That was the sight that greeted Iruka and the 2 rabbits. Ichibo was riding on his leader's shoulders. Nanaboho was back to his normal self, having removed the genjutsu as soon as they had gotten in the tunnels. So, how is our young ninja? The rabbit leader exclaimed as soon as he entered Naruto's underground lair. The samurai waited until his master, along with Iruka, had rejoined him near the training kid before responding he can be taught. He is not particularly talented with the sword, but has great endurance and doesn't shy from training. Good, good. And your vote? I vote yes. Monty, standing silent and near, thumped the ground once. Yes? The rabbit leader answered. The small bunny thumped once again, this time with both paws, then twice in quick succession. You sure? He hit the ground once again. Okay. So, with 4 votes out of the requisite 3, the rabbit leader intoned very ceremonially. Naruto Uzumaki, you have been cordially accepted as a member of the rabbit clan. Now there are only 3 steps left. First, do you swear to follow the rules of the rabbit clan? To never be without children, to never let the clan die out, and to never let one's knowledge be forgotten? Yes. Naruto answered, standing ramrod straight. Second. The Rabbit King said, motioning to a Chibo that was standing on his shoulder. This one has something to ask. Said animal jumped down, coming to stand in front of the academy student. Uzumaki-san, I would like to accompany you as you go about your life. I will help you, guard you and fight with you as necessary. I'll train you and train with you, so that both of us would be the best we can. He bowed low. Please accept this selfish request, Uzumaki-san. I will do my best to be worthy of you. Naruto didn't know what to answer. He wasn't even sure if he'd understood properly. It sounded too good to be true. He instinctively turned towards Iruka for clarification. Basically, he wants to be to you as Akamaru is to Kiba. You understand now? The Chunin responded to the unspoken question. Slowly, Naruto broke into a wide smile. He bent down as much as possible, just to tower less over the still bowing rabbit. Sure. Ichibo head rose in a flash. One thing though. I'm Naruto, so call me that. No Uzumaki-san or something like that, okay? Said Rabbit nodded while jumping up and down, then leapt to Naruto's shoulder and started nuzzling him in the neck. Both Iruka and Nanaboa let the scene go on without any interruptions. Iruka knew how much Naruto needed acceptance from others, and suspected something similar in Ichibo. He was glad Naruto had someone else than the Hokage and himself, even if that person was a rabbit. He suspected a similar train of thought was going through the elder rabbit's head. Third. Nanaboa intoned after the new duo had a few minutes to regain composure. The signing of the scroll. He once again made a string of hand signs, and another rabbit popped right in front of him. This one was a little taller than Miyamoto, twice as large, and covered in armor plates. Said scroll was hanging on the summon's belly. It handed the scroll to the rabbit leader on the instant it appeared. Nanaboa wasted no time unrolling it, and after a few meters he had a blank spot handy to place in front of Naruto. Now, to sign this scroll and confirm your contract with the rabbits, you need to place a handprint and blood of each of your hands on the paper, then to write down your name the same way below them. What's with the other names? They're all smudged and unreadable. That's what happens when a summoner dies, the rabbit leader answered. The scroll is special and keeps the blood fresh, but it's the user's chakra that keeps the blood legible. Meaning that upon a summoner's death, the blood runs and makes its signature impossible to read. Cutting open his own palm with a kunai, Naruto used the blood there to wet his hands. That means there isn't any other rabbit summoner left, right? Right. Naruto wasted no time placing the handprints and writing down his name, knowing from experience that the cut he had made wouldn't bleed for long. As soon as he was done, Nanaboa re-rolled the scroll for storage and handed it to its original carrier, which disappeared as soon as it was back in place. Miyamoto, Monty, we will be leaving also, the elder summon said. Miyamoto nodded, bowed, and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Turning to Naruto, Nanaboa smiled. I expect you to summon me again in a week to see how much you improved, partner. He handed Naruto his paw with a grin. Naruto shook it gratefully. I will, partner, he said, smiling. Take good care of my grandson, then. And then he too vanished. Monty then followed suit an instant later. Naruto turned to Ichibo in a flash. "Grandson? Sorry we're late," said the two clones disguised as civilian children. They quickly took their places around the council table. "Good," the original ninja exclaimed, clapping his hands together. Ichibo, standing upon Naruto's head, was looking around confusion. "Now we can begin. As you know from various clone memories, this little guy is Ichibo, one of the rabbit summons, and the newest part of our council. Ichibo, this is the prank council, the group where we Naruto's plan and decide upon what should be done. And this works with all of you being the same person?" Ichibo asked, visibly confused. "You'll see," replied the bunshin known as Muramaru. "So, now that we're all there. Status report. I finished both furnishing my place and buying the remaining ninja supplies we don't have in abundance," Iruka said, showing her kunoichi outfit as proof of her words. "I also have 3 clones currently studying the required book, since my cover includes being better on the theoretical side than the other 2. Good. Muramaru? I unfortunately haven't started on studying, but I've been given today the apartment I'll be using while in the academy." The group nodded. "Some second-hand stuff has also been delivered to me by the Chunin who tested me. Mostly old ninja stuff. I'll be going through it as soon as I go back out." "Okay. How about you two?" Naruto asked, pointing to the 2 civilian latecomers. "Not as good on our side. We entered Konoha late today, and haven't managed to find the person holding the deed for the shop we've been thinking of using," the female copy answered. "The 2 other clones are also busy filling the various papers we need to live in Konoha legally." "How come none of the others had to fill such papers?" one of the clones looking like Naruto asked. "Personally, I believe that those are part of the documents Iruka and that other teacher, Kiritori, filled for us," the Naruto disguised as a civilian boy replied. "There's also quite a bit of red tape added with the various permits for shopkeepers and traders being involved. I guess that means you've decided on what names to use, correct?" the real Naruto asked, looking in turn toward each of the civilians. "Yup. I'm Jisei Komori," the female one said. "And I'm her brother, Jisei Kokii. Our father is Jine and our mother, Ane," her brother continued. "Perfect. Kokii, Komori, remember to update everyone via clone about this selection." The 2 nodded while Naruto went on. "The fact that you guys are not up to schedule isn't that bad. Your placement isn't as time-sensitive as the one of the 2 ninja bunshin. Now, unless there's an emergency, this will be the last council meeting before the academy opens. So, we need to make sure everything is as perfect as we can make it. We can't be meeting every day as we did before or it'll draw too much attention." The whole council nodded. "So, first thing, techniques. I'd like your opinion on what we should focus on," the real academy student asked. "You think we have a good enough mastery of the chakra shield," one of the undisguised clones said. "I have to agree," another added. "We need to at least have a few others working on new jutsu." "Let's put it to the vote," the original concluded. The vote was unanimous, and further bargaining split the clones' training in half, with one continuing work on the shielding technique while the other would go back to the 5 remaining elemental jutsu they'd originally selected. "Okay, one down. Second point, the clones outside. We need at least one person to take care of that. That includes everything, maps, numbers, what we can buy and sell, etc. I won't be able to take care of that, since I'll be back to the academy soon, so I'd like for volunteers." 3 of the clones raised their hands. "Good, then I'm leaving that in your hands. We'll expect a report at the next meeting though," the female civilian added. "No problem," the first of the 3 replied, while the others nodded. "Last thing then," Naruto continued. "Ichibo, that's you," said Rabbit jumped down to the council table. "What can I do for you, Naruto?" "I've been thinking and I think you should go with Iruka for the classes." "Why?" "I'd much rather stay with the real you." I know, but the fact is, when classes start, if you stay with me, I'll need to explain your presence. Naruto sighed, clearly unhappy with the fact. And I can't. You're visibly not from Konoha and, as an academy student and orphan, I'm not supposed to have been far outside the village. The council nodded sadly. Ariko, though, can explain your presence as something your father bought you as an acceptance present or something. Ichibo hit the table twice with a paw. That's only starting with the academy, right? Right. Then okay, but I'm staying with the real you until then. The rabbit rose to stand on his two hind paws. I meant what I said earlier. I'm staying by you. He then jumped straight into Naruto's hair. Fine by me, he said with a smile. He then looked around the table at the various clones present. If there isn't anything else. Rising, the various bunshins shook their heads in answer. Then this meeting is done. The council will meet again after the first day of school. He concluded while putting his seat back into place. The various Narutos each went back to their own work. Again, the clone names follow an obvious pattern, as can be seen in the Japanese translations below. Ane shadow, gloom. Jin figure/shadow of a person. Koki silhouette, dark shadow. Komori cloudiness, cloudy weather, shadow. Jisei imitation, forgery, copy. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.